Good evening, welcome to Novara Live. Coming up tonight, Israel's Knesset has passed a death penalty bill solely for Palestinian detainees. Trump says US allies should just take oil from the Strait of Hormuz as US gas prices hit $4 a gallon. We'll discuss monarchism and support for Trump's war within the Iranian diaspora. And finally, was Nigel Farage right to say that he could capture the youth vote? Spoiler. He hasn't. I'm Bastani, and tonight I'm joined by Kieran and Andrieu. Kieran, how are we?
As ever, Aaron, buoyed by the continuity of being able to join you on a Tuesday evening through otherwise very tragic political times. How are you?
I'm very good. There are two constants right now in the global geopolitical environment. One is China.
Yep.
And the other one, of course, is Novara Live here every Tuesday with Kieran and myself. Before we get into tonight's show, we have an important favour to ask of you. Over the past few years, our audience has grown by millions. Quite extraordinary to say that word, millions. And a huge part of that growth is right here on Novara Live. We're gearing up to make our biggest leap yet, but to make sure we do it right, we really need to understand who you actually are. We read your comments in the chat and on our videos, but this is an opportunity to go deeper and for you to let us know what you think and who you are. And we're running a giveaway alongside it, so if you complete the details that you need to complete before 11:59 p.m. on Sunday, the 12th of April, you could be in with a chance of winning one of 5 £50 vouchers to spend in the Novara shop. That's not just for t-shirts, for tote bags. You can get some pretty cool books as well. Your feedback really matters. So to complete that survey, go to novara.media/survey and fill it in while you're watching the show tonight. The link for that is in the description below. That was Israel's far-right Minister of National Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir, making a joyous champagne toast moments after the country's Knesset passed a new apartheid law, one freeing the state to kill Palestinians with even greater immunity. The bill now makes it almost compulsory for Israel's courts to impose the death penalty on Palestinians convicted of acts of terrorism, resulting in the death of an Israeli. Now, defenders of Israel will often point to people like Ben-Gvir and say he doesn't really represent the country's politics, that he's an extremist. But the truth is rather different. In the Knesset vote on Monday, a jubilant Ben-Gvir was hardly an outlier, with many members wearing shiny nooses pinned to the lapels of their jackets. A large section of Israel's parliament were in celebratory, ebullient mood when the bill passed its second and third reading, with 62 of the Knesset's lawmakers, including those from opposition parties, voting in favour of the law and just 48 against. It wasn't even very close. The new law applies throughout the territories controlled by Israel, including the occupied West Bank and most of Gaza. And while it doesn't explicitly mention Palestinians as the target of executions, it contains a distinction that makes it clear that only Palestinians will be eligible. The death penalty now becomes applicable to any person who kills someone else, quote, with the intent to deny the existence of the State of Israel. That means that Israeli terrorists, nationalists, for example, will be exempt. And according to some, like the bill's sponsor, Limor Son HaMelech, there's no such thing as a Jewish terrorist anyway. HaMelech, a far-right expansionist annexationist politician, is a long-term superfan of executing Palestinians. In early March, she put out this video as part of her celebration of the Jewish holiday Purim.
זה לא משנה אם בזריקה, ברעל או בחבלים, העיקר חוק עונש מוות למחבלים, אשר ישלטו היהודים המה בשונאיהם. Purim Sameach לכל עם ישראל.
If you're listening to the podcast, that was HaMelech, literally dressed up as the death penalty for Palestinians, holding a syringe and a noose. She says it doesn't matter if it's an injection with poison or ropes. The main thing is the death penalty for terrorists. The Jews will rule their enemies. I mean, this is just crazy, crazy stuff. We'll get into more detail in a moment, just how crazy it is, but it's jaw-dropping, frankly. Her husband enjoyed the dress-up too, going as occupation, expulsion and settlement, and carrying a machine gun, a plane and a small house. Very normal stuff which Britain politically supports across both major parties. And by the way, if you don't agree with that, then you're not defending Western values and Western civilization. The bill they're celebrating there is very clear in its targeting of Palestinians. In the occupied territories, there are two separate court systems, the civil court system is used to try settlers, including for crimes like murder. Palestinians, however, are tried in military courts. And in those courts, and not the civil courts, the death penalty will be, in most cases, mandatory if a Palestinian is convicted of terrorism. That will mean hanging almost immediately, with the execution having to be carried out within 90 days, except in very rare circumstances. It also won't require the judges in the court to unanimously agree, which again is extraordinary. Instead, a simple majority is all it'll take to condemn a Palestinian to be murdered by the state within 3 months. There's also no provision for a pardon for those sentenced to die, and it prohibits commuting sentences. There's no chance of having it changed to a life sentence once it's been handed down. Now, this all flies in the face of international law, not that Israel cares, which, by the way, also enshrines the right of the Palestinians to armed struggle against, guess what, occupation. Israel has always regarded that resistance as terrorism, even while international and many domestic laws, including in the UK, recognise that Israel's ongoing and growing occupation of Palestinian territories is illegal. Of course, Western governments have responded to Israel's latest descent into outright savagery and opposition to the Enlightenment with the usual carefully worded statements. This was from British Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper. We are particularly worried about the de facto discriminatory character of the bill. The adoption of this bill would risk undermining Israel's commitments with regards to democratic principles. The death penalty is an inhumane and degrading form of punishment without any deterring effect. This is why we oppose the death penalty, whatever the circumstances around the world. The rejection of the death penalty is a fundamental value that unites us. We urge the Israeli decision makers in the Knesset and government to abandon these plans. We're worried. We urge Churchillian stuff indeed. Of course, there wasn't a single mention there of the fact that the law will, in reality, only be used to kill Palestinians. In other words, it's an apartheid law passed by an apartheid state. The application of the law to military courts in the occupied territories now adds explicitly state-sanctioned murder to the long list of abuses that Palestinians face while in Israeli custody. Beating, starvation, rape. These are all tools the Israelis have customarily used to break the spirits of Palestinian political prisoners. Those military courts are also essentially rubber stamps for Palestinian convictions, many of which now carry execution as the penalty. According to Israeli human rights organisation B'Tselem, those courts have a 96% conviction rate, based largely on so-called confessions extracted under duress and torture during interrogations. Then there are the settlers who regularly attack Palestinians in the territory they're busy stealing. In the last month alone, 5 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli settlers, and 4 entire communities have been forced off their land after their lives were threatened by repeated attacks. The conviction rate for those criminals, Israeli settlers, who won't face execution and are tried in the country's civil courts, couldn't be more different to what Palestinians face. It's not 96%, it's not even 6%, it's 3%. Kieran, you have a bit of a personal interest in this story. It affects a member of your family potentially.
Well, I'll come to that in a moment. Let's be crystal clear. This is a continuation of genocide by other means. Israel now is the only country in modern history that has passed a law that ensures that 2 people can commit the same crime under the same circumstances, but one will receive punishment of death or a different punishment to the other on the basis of their ethnic grouping exclusively and explicitly as a matter of law. You have to go back to Nazi Germany to find anything comparable in the modern era. And then before that, Aaron, you have to go back to slave colonies. You have to go back to penal laws managing slaves in the colonies of European empires. We've reached the purest, the most distilled, the most naked and essential expression of racism in the modern world that is, I think, humanly imaginable. And all this will do is produce concept creep, because they can say terrorist, but that will be understood very elastically and arbitrarily. There's so much arbitrary power in Israel. It pervades everyday life in the way that they manage Palestinians. My own brother, as you mentioned a moment ago, was first arrested for terror-related charges when he was 12 years old for throwing stones at tanks. tanks that were in the West Bank, in a neighbouring town to his own. They were there to flatten the homes of his friends. And as we pointed out with the B'Tselem 96% statistic, the courts, the military courts convict people on the basis of evidence formed under duress or formed under duress and also formed through very, very little evidence. So this is genocide by other means, and we're at an incredibly dark moment. And I just want to talk briefly about Ben-Gvir and those characters. Those people are the logical consequence, because in one sense this is very shocking and unprecedented, but those people are predictable. They're the logical consequence of a system that from the day you're born, with your mother's milk, you imbibe a philosophy that says that Palestinians are subhuman. And that is the tumour that emerges on the body politic if that's what you do every single day of a person's life. I'm not making any excuses for them. They're the worst people on earth. But it's a systemic thing in Israel. And when you see in Yvette Cooper's statement, the kind of good Israel, bad Israel thing, there's a good Israel, but this stuff really concerns us. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. They are, I'm afraid, one and the same. You found a state on the basis of dispossession of an indigenous people, and then you've got to maintain that over many, many years. Yeah. That requires a lot of violence, and it requires legitimization and dehumanization of the people that you're subjugating. So they're a logical consequence of that system. They're not an accident.
But also you get, and this is really key, right? You get people like Yvette Cooper, they'll appeal to the Israeli Labour Party. They'll say, our sister party in Israel, and that was, the party that was really central in the founding of the State of Israel, MAPI, the Workers' Party, etc. And that's a certain kind of Zionism, which, we think is good and we defend it, and this is something different. Well, even if you think that, and I think you're right, I think a lot of this is a necessary outcome of just dispossessing a people. But even if you think that, it's quite clear what the political trajectory of Israeli politics is. Revisionist Zionism, which is the tradition in which Benjamin Netanyahu was raised, his father was a revisionist Zionist, was the political loser for the first 30, 40, 50 years of Israeli political life. It wasn't making the weather in Israeli politics for a very long time in the way that...
1970s was when it started to.
It really starts to grow. And now, of course, it's very much the centre of Israeli politics. Benjamin Netanyahu, by the standards of the 40s or the 50s, would have been a political extremist. He is now, I think, it's fair to say, actually, when you look at people like Ben-Gvir, comparatively speaking, and I use this term within that context, he's a moderate. And my view is, in 5 to 10 years after he's gone, people will look back at Netanyahu and say, wow, he was really a consensus politician. He was trying to bring people together. And that's because the trajectory of Israeli politics is becoming more barbaric, more murderous over time. And I'm tired of people in this country saying, well, do you deny Israel's right to exist? How dare you say that Zionism is racism? We can have these, actually maybe even interesting abstract debates. That's okay, fine, whatever. The reality is Israel is a political entity founded on the dispossession of people, founded on ethnic cleansing, which is just clearly getting worse, which is just clearly moving more and more in one direction when it comes to apartheid, when it comes to not having equality under the law, where it qualitatively looks at people who are not Jewish in a fundamentally different way to its Jewish citizens. And I thought actually the clip we showed of an Israeli politician at Purim and what she was wearing and what she was saying, we are insistently told in the West that Israel is the front line of Western civilization. Now, I don't like these kind of generalities and that thinking necessarily, but it's completely alien to the politics of the West. It is. If you try to do that in Britain, here's the crazy thing, Kieran. There are British politicians who say, they're right to do that, or they can do that, that's their country. If a British politician did that in this country, Yvette Cooper would be calling the police on her, right? If they were doing and saying the same thing, right? If they were saying that non-white British people in this country should be treated in the same way that that person is saying they should treat Palestinians, they would be on a domestic extremist list, they'd be arrested by the police, they'd be questioned, there'd be a national inquiry about how on earth these people have such a profile in our national political conversation. What the hell happened? But yet when it's in Israel, it's actually tacitly condoned, and we even give that country political support.
I'll say something briefly about MAPI. You mentioned the original Israeli Labour Party, founded, certainly led for a long time by Ben-Gurion, and indeed founded, he's one of the founding members. His politics was predicated on the idea that Palestinians would get up and leave and would forget. He said, within a generation, they won't care about this land, they'll forget. And that's why we could say that MAPI, or the Labour Party, wasn't committed in the same way that Likud are, or to the same strategies as Likud. It was premised on the idea that they would leave. And when they didn't leave, when Palestinians didn't leave and Palestinians did resist, it then led to a changing of the guard in the early 1970s towards a more Likud-led strategy, which is to say, OK, they haven't left, so now what's the next logical step of Zionism? We have to continue to ethnically cleanse them as aggressively as possible. But you're right in that Likud has in turn been eclipsed or outflanked by, for example, Ben-Gvir's power, Jewish power. But there are many of these powers of different denominations that have outflanked Likud. All of them, I think, are logical steps towards the same endpoint, which is the total eradication of Palestinians from the land. They responded to different material conditions at the time. In the 1950s and 60s, Israel had the world on its side. So you could also make the point they didn't have to be as openly exterminationist all the time. But they're stepping stones toward the same logical endpoint, which is where we find ourselves today.
Let's carry on with this story for a few moments longer. The Israeli state is now threatening Palestinians with execution for any and all acts of resistance against its occupation. The aim is to undermine the spirit of the Palestinian people and to make its fighters unwilling to take on the Israeli military and government. Again, to repeat, something which is perfectly acceptable under international law. You have a right to resist occupation. In a statement issued after the vote, the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas said this: "Such laws and measures will not break the will of the Palestinian people or undermine their steadfastness," Abbas' office said in a statement, "and nor will they deter them from continuing their legitimate struggle for freedom, independence, and the establishment of an independent Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital." Elsewhere, the Palestinian Authority's foreign ministry said this: "Israel has no sovereignty over Palestinian land," adding, "This law once again reveals the nature of the Israeli colonial system, which seeks to legitimize extrajudicial killing under legislative cover." That does all sound very NGO-esque. I mean, I don't know about the limits of what they can realistically say, because ultimately they're, I won't say puppet regime, but they are subject to a great deal of oversight by Tel Aviv. But anyway, armed groups Hamas and Islamic Jihad went further, calling on Palestinians to carry out attacks in retaliation for the law. The law reflects the bloody nature of the occupation and its approach based on murder and terror. I mean, I would agree with that. This fascist law embodies the mentality of criminal gangs and their bloodthirstiness and sets a dangerous precedent that threatens the lives of our prisoners in the occupation's prisons. It will be met with a response befitting the magnitude of their crimes. The law is certainly criminal, shockingly so, intended as it is to impose death by execution on Palestinians resisting occupation. And in its de facto racialized dimension, it's made the Israeli legal system even more discriminatory than that of apartheid South Africa. This was from former ANC MP and author Andrew Feinstein. Not even apartheid South Africa codified executions for only one race group. Israel is now the most racist state the world has known since Nazi Germany. As the son of a Holocaust survivor who lost dozens of her family, his mother, I say this cautiously and with extreme pain, but it is now fact. A fact that it may be. But some Israeli officials continue to cling to the idea that Israel is a bastion of democracy, the only democracy in the Middle East, a beacon of Western values. Listen, we don't hang people from cranes. We do it quietly, secretly, and only if you're Palestinian. This was the country's ambassador to Austria, explaining how the law shows that Israel is really all about human rights.
Decision went through the Knesset to instate the death penalty in Israel. Now, let me just clarify. There always was a death penalty in Israel. It just wasn't implemented. There were only two cases in the history of Israel where they implemented the death penalty. One of them was Eichmann, the Nazi. It was always there, but it was not implemented due to the restraint that Israel acted on this issue. Israel is very careful, and Israel is a human rights state. is very careful not, we know that mistakes can be made in capital punishment. But we reached a situation where you have terrorists on your border, terrorists crossing the border, attacking communities, and the usual punishment is no deterrent. Because they believe, first of all, they get released in exchanges of prisoners. They then attack again in order to exchange prisoners. So we understand that this is not a deterrence besides the ideological, radical beliefs that they have, which are deranged. We needed extra deterrence. So the laws went through, which actually, again, I said, just like in the United States, in Japan, and in India, which have capital punishment. Israel has the right as a sovereign state to decide that it is implementing the capital punishment that it has.
So the argument there is actually in a way interesting, right? It's saying that Israel is a sovereign state, so it has the right for capital punishment, which is true. Other countries like Japan, as he says, have capital punishment. But if you take the argument at face value, presumably he would also say that Israel, as a sovereign state, has the right to have capital punishment, but just for one racial group, which is essentially what this law is.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a pretty scary place to be, right? That's a bit like A Handmaid's Tale. Well, we're a sovereign entity, and therefore, you know, women don't work, and they're just going to reproduce, etc. It can lead to some pretty terrifying places, can't it?
I mean, look, sovereignty can give you anything if you interpret it as narrowly as that. International law obviously prohibits this because it's applied to territory conquered in war, which is inadmissible, so Gaza and the West Bank. If you want to interpret sovereignty that way, yeah, you could say, well, we're going to enact gendercide. We're going to kill half of the human race in our country because they belong to this gender, or you can say anything. Sovereignty doesn't tell you anything. It doesn't tell you anything. What Andrew Feinstein said is true. Even apartheid South Africa didn't introduce a law segmenting a particular group in the population and earmarking them for a death penalty punishment. I repeat, two people committing exactly the same crime under exactly the same circumstances will be sentenced differently, one to death, one not, under the terms of this. That is, as I say, the purest, most existential, most naked form of racism that I can possibly conceive of right now.
And people will say, well, if you compare Israel to Nazi Germany, the Third Reich, that is an anti-Semitic trope.
Right.
But as Andrew Feinstein said, we have to literally go that far back to find a state that behaves in this way. This is worse than apartheid South Africa. And I presume you could have made the same arguments after Kristallnacht in the 1930s, right? You could have made the same arguments. This is about state sovereignty. As a state, we have to guarantee our own domestic national interests, et cetera, et cetera. But of course, we've had for a very long time constraints on that kind of stuff with good reason. People like to decry and diminish international law, but that's precisely why these things are out there, conventions with regards to things like human rights, freedom of speech, etc. But Israel has dismissed all of those in terms of the war in Gaza. It's now turning those same arguments against quite basic rights that we don't just take for granted here in the West. It's almost inconceivable in somewhere like Britain that you'd have capital punishment for one ethnic group.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's very simple. Either there's international law and it matters, or it's law of the jungle. And if it's law of the jungle, we can all behave like beasts. You can't condemn October 7th. You can't condemn Nazi Germany. You can't condemn any horror in the long pantheon of horrors in human history because it's the law of the jungle and we can all behave like beasts in the law of the jungle. There's no discrimination. There's no differentiation. I can slaughter your family. You can slaughter my family. Do we really want that? I mean, that's where Israel has led a whole host of its allies very, very rapidly. You know, in 2 to 3 years, that seems to be the new architecture of the international system. If Israel slaughters this group of people, we send out some condemnatory words, and then we basically carry on with business as usual. But that invites much horror upon ourselves because, as I say, the beastliness will be returned. And that's a great shame. Nobody wants that for anybody.
You see this with the Iranian nuclear scientists being killed by Israel now for 10, 15 years. People say, don't do that. And then, of course, you get supporters of Israel saying, well, why shouldn't they? Well, because eventually people will start doing it here. That's why. You don't want to normalise it. We've got a comment here from Nigel the Crab with £9.99. Legalised ethnic cleansing accepted by the masses through the vehicle of moral disengagement. What a shameful age we existed. And how compromised, meek and pusillanimous Western governments are. I certainly agree with that, Nigel. Thanks for the super chat. If you want to support our work here at Novara Media, we have a daily show, we have downstream, we have articles, social media content. We are growing and growing and growing. There is, of course, that survey I mentioned at the start of this show in the description below. But you can, of course, also support Novara Media by going to novaramedia.com/support, helping us build a new media for different politics. Here's a crazy number for you. In March, Kieran, how many views do you think we got on YouTube here at Novara Media?
I believe I've seen this statistic, but I haven't retained it. So it is effectively a guess. 5 million.
Ah, you. 32 million in March. Thanks to our extraordinary supporters. They allow us to grow and grow, be bigger, bolder, better, and more ambitious. I think there'll be a month pretty soon where we get 100 million views in 1 month. And that is really influencing the debate. Help us get there. Go to novaramedia.com/support. US President Donald Trump is in real trouble over his ill-advised war on Iran. And as Tehran's sustained blockade of the Strait of Hormuz continues to impact oil prices around the globe, they hit $118 a barrel today, the commander-in-chief appears to be feeling the pressure from leaders elsewhere. In this post to Truth Social earlier today, the cracks were really beginning to show. All those countries that can't get jet fuel because of the Strait of Hormuz, like the United Kingdom, which refuse to get involved in the decapitation of Iran, I have a suggestion for you. Number one, buy from the US, we have plenty. And number two, build some delayed courage, go to the Straits and just take it, all caps. Just take it. The US Navy can't do it, but apparently the Royal Navy can. You'll have to start learning how to fight for yourself. The USA won't be there to help you anymore. Just like you weren't there for us, Iran has been essentially decimated. The hard part is done. Go get your own oil. President DJT. Just to be clear, the only time that Article 5 has been invoked for a NATO member was for the United States after 9/11. Britain got involved in the war in Afghanistan and 454 people were killed as a result, but apparently that's not getting involved. The UK didn't get involved this time in Trump's mad misadventure because you have to ask, what interests of ours would it have served? Not to mention, the assault itself is illegal and has unleashed disaster across the region. There's a reason why Trump is now trying to duck out. But it seems the new world order means the US doesn't have to clean up the mess that it makes. And being an ally means doing whatever Washington tells you to do. That message was made even clearer by US Secretary of War Pete Hegseth a little later on Tuesday.
I think the president was clear this morning in his truth that there are countries around the world who ought to be prepared to step up on this critical waterway as well. It's not just the United States Navy. Last time I checked, there was supposed to be a big bad Royal Navy that could be prepared to do things like that as well. So he's pointing out this is an international waterway that we use less than most, in fact, dramatically less than most. So the world ought to pay attention and be prepared to stand up. President Trump's been willing to do the heavy lifting on behalf of the free world to address this threat of Iran. It's not just our problem set going forward, even though we have done the lion's share of preparation to ensure that that strait will be open, which is an outcome the president's been very clear on.
There's so much about that video, right? As the president posted earlier with the truth. It's so Orwellian. I posted a truth earlier today on Truth Social.
It's like a wish or something.
Yeah, and he's saying, you know, we've done all the hard work. Now you guys can sort things out. Just a reminder to our audience out there, the Strait of Hormuz was open before the United States and Israel killed a head of state. Before they killed 2,000 Iranians. And now they're saying that actually it's our weakness for not backing them, even though we have actually allowed their bombers to take off from RAF bases. It's because of us that they've failed. You find this a lot with right-wing populists. I mean, you find it with all kinds of people. You find it a lot with right-wing populists. When they fail, everyone else is to blame. Yeah. But this is such a crazy double standard, such brazen hypocrisy that I struggle to believe, and we'll get onto this in a moment, I struggle to believe even many of Trump's own supporters actually believe it.
Well, I think it's dwindling. His support is dwindling, even among his own base. And you see it, actually, you saw that baked in, that logic you just mentioned, Aaron. You see it baked in from the beginning of the war, which is we're giving the Iranians the opportunity to liberate themselves. And if they don't take it, that's their lookout. So the get out clause was woven in, was stitched in from the start. Can I just quickly drill in, if you'll excuse the horrible pun, drill into the economics of what they're saying? Very briefly.
Go for it.
Okay. First of all, they're saying oil, we don't need the Strait of Hormuz. A lot of helium and gas goes through the Strait of Hormuz. I know this has been mentioned on this show before. Helium is massively important for artificial intelligence and the manufacturing of the products, the hardware that produces, or hosts at least, AI. AI is basically the thing that's been propping up the US economy over the past 10 years. So once that bubble does burst, it's going to be really, really bad for the US economy, which in turn will be very bad for the Israeli economy. So just fixating on oil is ridiculous in itself for that reason. But also, you would think that having inflationary pressures across your consumer markets, it's all very well saying, we're going to be fine, Europe will be effed, the rest of it. Actually, having inflationary pressures in your consumer markets is a terrible thing. It means it's bad for imports and it's bad for exports.
Yeah.
So there's that. Also, the US exports about 25 to 30% of its domestically produced oil. So it's not like they're just making it and then using it and then there's like a kind of net equalization there. They're exporting a lot of that onto the world market, which is subject to world market prices. So that 25 to 30% will be very adversely impacted by everything that's happening, by the shortages that are coming, whether or not they're covered domestically. They also import some of their oil, by the way, because their refineries are better suited to the kind of oil that you get elsewhere, not to the oil that they produce in the US. And oil, finally, oil is a commodity that's an input into the price of so many other goods.
Everything, basically,
Everything. Right? So, saying, well, we're fine for oil. Well, no, but what about everything else that oil is an input into that you're going to import? So the economic logic is non-existent. It's non-existent.
Yeah, if you're importing coffee beans from Brazil, you can't grow much coffee in the US. We've talked about this a lot because, of course, there are tariffs on Brazil, but, and tariffs on everybody else. And the argument was, well, we'll do it at home instead, but you can't grow coffee in the US. How are you going to do that? If energy prices go up in Brazil, coffee becomes more expensive. That's more expensive for the American consumer. We've talked about inflation a lot. It's happening. A few other points, though, quickly. The Bab el Mandab in the Red Sea is about 9% of oil going through there. Strait of Hormuz is about 20% of oil. The latter has been closed. The former might be closed, depending on what the Houthis and the position of Yemen and all of this is. Let's see. So far, they haven't really got massively involved because they've not needed to be. That's 30% of global energy. And I think more than anything else, the witlessness of this exposes America doesn't care about its allies. The two big areas that suffer as a result are Europe and East Asia. Japan, of course, is hugely dependent on energy from this part of the world, as is South Korea. China is a net exporter of refined oil, refined petrol. Taiwan could end up being dependent on it. So you've enhanced potential dependence of Taiwan on China. You're helping finance Putin's war in Europe. Of course, America has said by 2027, the Europeans are going to have to fund all of this themselves, right? So they're saying they're pulling back and they're withdrawing financial support. At the same time, they've done something which is giving $50, $60 billion a year, maybe extra to Putin. So you're hurting and hindering your allies, Europe and East Asia. You're helping Russia and China. This doesn't seem like particularly smart politics on the part of Washington. Those comments from Hegseth and Trump are coming at a time when there's a big visit on the cards as well. King Charles and Camilla are set to go to Washington on a state visit in a few weeks, though politicians are now warning it could be a humiliation for the royals. What is the king, basically a human-shaped ornament, supposed to do if Trump publicly criticizes our armed forces or prime minister to his face and in public? In that press conference, Hegseth also spoke of a new regime in Iran, saying, quote, regime change has occurred. Who knows if that's true, but the Iranian strategy appears to remain in place. Early on Tuesday, Iranian missiles struck a fully laden Kuwait-registered oil tanker in Dubai's port. Trump isn't only facing pressure from the international markets either, he's also getting it in the neck from people at home. The president's net approval rating now stands at negative 23, with pollsters warning of profound problems arising between Trump and his base. For context, that's the lowest approval rating for Trump since the start of his second term, having dropped nearly 5 points in just a month. And there are particular features of YouGov polling released today that are likely to really irk the president. Trump's second term is the red line. And as you can see, he's fallen far and fast, now dipping to negative 23. That is significantly lower than Joe Biden's polling at this point in his presidency when he was only on negative 5. That's the blue line, by the way. It's also a lot lower than the first Trump term when he was polling at this point at 10 points higher. That's the pink line. This is all very, very bad, isn't it? So why are Americans turning on Trump? One factor is gas prices. The average price Americans are now paying for petrol has hit $4 a gallon, the highest it's been since 2022. And it was that lingering cost of living crisis, fueled by factors like Russia's war in Ukraine, that played a major factor in voters' anger with the Democrats at the 2024 election. $4 a gallon may not sound like a lot for petrol to us in the UK, but in the States, which is heavily car-reliant and with almost non-existent public transport outside of major cities, it's a massive shock, one that's only likely to get worse. Quickly, Kieran, on the Russia-Ukraine point, I think the Russian invasion of Ukraine meant we lost about 2 million barrels a day of oil. Hormuz shutting has lost 20 million. 20 million barrels of oil. So we're really in the foothills of something much, much worse than 2022, which, as I just mentioned, was a major factor in Biden not being re-elected. This is happening before midterms for Trump.
Yes, and just one more stat on the losses. In 2022, 75 billion cubic meters of gas were lost because of the Russia-Ukraine war. In 2022, already in 32 days of this war, we've lost about 145 billion, probably more now, about 150 billion cubic meters of gas. That's double in 30 days. There is no way that this does not feed into massive inflationary convulsions. And you're quite right. There's no way that I can see. I mean, politics isn't an exact science, but I can't see how that doesn't have a major impact politically for Trump at the midterms. Historically speaking, empirically, inflation is one of the most reliable predictors of electoral politics or election outcomes.
Inflation, interest rates, right? That's the thing. I mean, we talked about this a lot. How did David Cameron come in 2020, 2010 rather, not get a majority? 5 years later, goes back to the country, gets a majority. Why? Because we had 0% interest rates basically for 5 years. And if you're a homeowner, you're on mortgage, you've got the triple lock, so pensioners are doing okay. That's your coalition. What's Trump's coalition if he's offering just more military spending, more crazy wars, more inflation? It's like he's actively trying to go against the whole agenda which he argued for before winning a second term. Before we go on to our next story, a quick reminder that we're giving away 5 £50 vouchers, I feel like I'm on ITV or something, to spend in the Novara Media merch shop. All you have to do is complete the Novara Media audience survey by 11:59 p.m, not 1 minute later, on Sunday the 12th of April, to be in with a chance of winning. This show is only possible because of you, and your feedback is really important to us. So let us know what you think by following the link in the description below or heading to novara.media/survey. The Iranian diaspora are, it's fair to say, pretty unique. Like any community, they aren't a homogenous mass, of course, and there's a wide range of views. But it's also true that Iranians overseas, particularly in the US, Canada and Britain, are very vocal not only in their criticism of the Islamic Republic, which is of course their right, but in arguing for a return of the monarchy and Reza Pahlavi. They don't just support a change in the government or various policies through things like strikes and protests, but somewhat unusually, through foreign intervention, war, and even terrorism. Personally, as someone who's half Iranian, I can't really understand that, but my views are just that, mine. There are, however, moments where the reality of the position of many monarchists looks outlandish and, dare I say, bewildering. One such example came to light yesterday. It featured a musician, purportedly of Iranian descent, whose name is Armin Aban. Here he is thanking what appeared to be teenage women for Israel's bombing of Iran.
I want to say thank you to you, Israeli people.
Yay. Is that good or not? I'm confused. Thank you, Israelis, no?
Yes.
Them.
Are you not from Israel?
I am.
Then you don't know if it's good or bad.
Go Israel. But you're saying that you're thanking us for bombing them, or you're thanking them for bombing us?
Thanking you for saving the people of Iran.
Of course, but we did not save them. We're killing them, bro.
I am Iranian and I'm thanking you.
Really?
Yes.
What he's saying is, thank you for saving them. Not killing, saving.
Second of all, your country is bombing the government of Iran, not Iranian people.
Right. Oh.
So
Yes.
it's a rescue mission.
Careful not to kill their freaking citizens.
You are trying to not to kill our citizens, but sometimes it happens.
We're killing them, bro. It's crazy, right? When you're talking to teenage girls, teenage young women, and they're like, this guy's crazy, makes no sense. You're trying not to kill our citizens, but sometimes it happens. Easy for that guy to say while he's living in God knows where, London, LA, Hamburg, Stockholm. We're killing them, bro. The fact that guy would just sit there and take that and smile, I think reflects a deeply internalized racism and self-hatred among some Iranians. Indeed, the extent to which Iranians overseas deny the reality of the situation extends to them even accusing their own compatriots who are being bombed in their homes, some of which, by the way, aren't particularly big fans of the government, of being crisis actors. It's not just Omar Jalili going full Alex Jones. Here's Faiza Alevi, reputedly an Iranian presently living in South Korea. Bollywood in Iran, and it's so progressive. The actresses can play without hijab for the Islamic Republic. To be clear, 2,000 people have died in Iran. There's no need to make stuff up. People are dying. On this particular instance, these are 3 different women. Ironically, it's an Iranian woman wearing hijab, arguing that all Iranians look the same. And she's saying the Islamic Republic is so repressive because they're not wearing hijab. I don't understand anymore. If you don't believe they are 3 different women, have a look at this. Here's women number 1 and 2. Okay? I mean, I understand that she's covered in dust on the right, so it might be hard. Okay, fine. Now, these don't really look like the same person, but if you want to just confirm that they aren't, then look at this. That's another picture of the second woman, clearly. Not the first, she's had the dust wiped down and whatnot. Then there's this lady. That's also a different person. So sure, it's 3 middle-aged women with medium to long black hair. Guess what? You're in Tehran, a city of 12 million people. There's lots of brown people with dark hair. Kind of likely to happen. Kieran, that video was particularly crazy, right? I mean, you have literal teenage girls saying, what? This makes no sense. Why are you cheering on your own compatriots being killed in their homes while they sleep? What the hell?
Right. I'll come back to something I said a couple of months ago in the context of Venezuela, the people who were cheering on the bombing of Venezuela. We think of the Iranian people, the Israeli people, any other people as part of a nation when we frame it in that way. But the people that I see, and that indeed in some cases I've debated on TV, that are part of the Iranian diaspora and are stationed in California or Connecticut, they don't seem to me to be very patriotic. They don't seem to me to be particularly closely bonded to their kin in Iran being bombed. And I detect that they are very ashamed. They're part of the Pahlavi movement. Pahlavi, as you'll know, Aaron, very well, in more detail than I do, the whole Pahlavi modernization was actually one that was rather ashamed of a lot of Iranian traditions. That was very much, I mean, he spent a lot of time in Switzerland, on the ski slopes. He spent a lot of time in Paris. He was very interested in, Europeanization of Iran in a way. And that's partly what produced the backlash, right, in Iran, partly. And I see that these kinds of people who left in 79 or their parents left in 79 and are stationed in places like Connecticut and California are cut from that cloth. They're embarrassed by the reality of Iran as they see it. They're embarrassed by their fellow country people actually in the country. And they see themselves as part of a transnational class, probably connected with Europeans, probably connected more closely to North Americans than they do to their fellow Iranian compatriots. And actually, briefly, it's also, there's something to be said about how Israeli white supremacism seems to be infecting all of the people that enter its orbit. Now, it's very possible that Iranians are very these kinds of Iranians, based on what you've told me and I've read and seen, they're more susceptible to that kind of white supremacy, like you said, internalized racism. We talk about Judeo-supremacy or Jewish supremacy when it comes to Israel, rightly, because that is a thing. But one thing that concerns me about that is that it does obscure the white supremacy that's hidden within that category. It's not actually, the state of Israel was founded on Jewish supremacy, sure, but actually white Jewish supremacy. You know, two brief examples. Zeev Jabotinsky, hugely influential for the revisionist movement that you mentioned a moment ago, reformist rather, and his whole thing was, we're European. Yes, we're Jewish, but we're European Jews. Ben-Gurion, he's come up twice now tonight, first Prime Minister of Israel. He was very disappointed by his words, the material caliber of the Jews that were coming to Israel in 1948, 1949 to create a Jewish majority in the state. They needed them to create a Jewish majority, but he was saying, we are Ashkenazi Jews, we are white European Jews, and it is our degree of civilization that marks us out, not just from the Arabs, but from these poor, his words, poor benighted creatures coming from the Arab world, coming from North Africa. They will take, his words, many generations to evolve and become as civilized as we white Jews are. And I know I've gone on a bit of a tangent, but I think it's relevant in this context.
And I think it's very similar. And actually, the hostility as well to the left. You know, you see this in revisionist Zionism, the tradition which Netanyahu is a part of, where they actually hate left-wing Jews almost as much as they hate Palestinians. Yeah. It's a similar thing with these guys. They actually dislike, again, members of the Iranian diaspora who might not like the government, but who are on the left. They, again, have a very pathological hatred of them. So it's white supremacy, it's self-hatred, it's also an instinctive hostility to so-called progressive forces. Finally, there's this, with Iranian Canadians who wanted to cheer on their country being bombed in Washington, refused access to the United States. Here's Mohammed Ali Mujarradi Shahzadeh on Instagram explaining precisely what happened.
This pro-war protest was much smaller than expected, and some of the people in the comments were apologizing, saying that many of those who were heading from Toronto to DC were turned away at the border. One of them even made a video in the bus complaining that they had been held up for over 7 hours, and they didn't even stop to think, wait a minute, we're not white, it's not like we thought. See, many in the Iranian diaspora are under this illusion that they're Aryan, that they're secular, that because they hold a Western passport, in this case Canadian, that they're part of the Western club. But sometimes they're reminded that they're not so Western and that actually they come from a quote-unquote shithole country, as Trump said. And he has banned many of those people from shithole countries from getting visas in the new ICE empire. So these Iranians, even though they have Canadian passports, even though they live in North America, even though they support Trump and say, thank you, Mr. Trump, and even though they were headed to Washington, D.C. to be part of a pro-Trump protest, they were detained at the border and turned away, not one, but one of the commenters said up to 7 buses full of people. So they drove all the way from Toronto to the border, they got held for 7 hours, went all the way back, basically wasted a day of their life, and I could have told them not to waste their time because it's well known that Iranians are not being given visas to enter America, and even if you have a Canadian passport, that little pesky thing still says born in Iran. So the benevolent white Americans who are bombing your country into freedom will also not show you enough dignity to let you into the country for a single day to protest in favor of its government. It's really sad, embarrassing, and shameful to be a Pahalvist in this moment. Even your daddy Trump turned you away.
I mean, talk about cucked. These people are the ultimate political cucks. It's like they're trying to be humiliated at every single turn. Kieran, I mean, that's an amazing story, right? Iranian Canadians tried to go to Washington to support their own country being bombed, and they're not allowed in because the country they're supporting is racist against them. It's discriminating against them on the basis of where they were born. They're Canadian citizens, and they still don't get the memo. We talked about some of the intellectual sort of underpinnings of this, but do you think there comes a moment where some of these Pahlavi supporters, these monarchists, these frankly self-hating Iranians who want to be white, that's what drives them and animates them, and it goes back a long way, like you're saying, to the modernization project of Iran. But notwithstanding all of that, you can understand and grasp where it comes from. Notwithstanding all of that, surely there must be a set of circumstances where these kinds of people say, hang on, you know what? I've been had. And what do you think that looks like? How do you think they will react to the potential failure of Reza Pahlavi returning to Iran and the Islamic Republic falling and there being, a monarchy once more?
So they're tragically useful idiots. I think useful idiot is the phrase. And a lot of internalized racism is really sad, but I just cannot find this sad because there's I think it's so contemptible wanting your country to be bombed from the safety of a safe country, a stable country. I cannot. Ultimately, internalized racism is a sad thing, but I'm sorry, I draw the line at this. Or I draw the line way before this. This is contemptible, and they should be really ashamed of themselves. And they're doing it. They belong, in many cases, I'm generalizing, but many cases to a privileged class of people. And this is kind of what I mean. They're the defenestrated people, the people who were they were pushed out by, as they say, a coup d'etat that was illegitimate, and they're waiting to come back and take their rightful place. Reza Pahlavi's, he declared himself the crown prince or the heir apparent in 1980 when he was 19 years old. It's all utterly delusional. Of course, it's impossible for me. It's impossible for some of the leading experts, so I'm not going to pretend that I know. It's impossible to get a clear gauge on where the Iranian people are. But I think it's pretty evident that, as one observer put it, the regime has deep roots in Iranian society that go beyond just this kind of astroturfing, superficial political level that's maintained through coercion or fear, and that there is zero evidence that Pahlavi has anything like grassroots support that's widespread enough to create a critical mass for him to dislodge the present power base and get him in. I mean, there's just no evidence for it.
No.
And so you would think, wouldn't you, Aaron, that this is the point I made to someone who was trying to argue for that. I'm sorry, but the burden of proof is on you.
Yeah.
You're talking about totally flipping an entire state on its head and potentially creating another Iraq. You've got a massive mountain of burden of proof to climb.
Yeah. If you actually look at 1979 as well, and by the way, I don't think it was a great idea to have an Islamic revolution in Iran, but if you look at 1979 in terms of the participation of the public, it's one of the most successful popular revolutions in human history, right? You can't just ignore that. And you have people whose name is Mohammed Ali Reza Najafi saying, I'm not Muslim. Actually, if you go back 15 generations, every person in your family is called Ali, Mohammed, Hussein, Mariam, Zainab, right? So you can say that, but the reality is that's not the case. And we were in this extraordinary situation in the last 6 months where a country where the most popular name is Mohammed, we were being told actually doesn't want Islam, right? Now, I understand actually in terms of strong supporters of the Islamic Republic, probably a minority, right, at the start of this year. I agree with that. By the way, many countries are like that. There's that great quote, isn't there, before the American War of Independence. I can't remember who said it, one of the founding fathers, maybe Hamilton. And he said at the start, we were 1/3 loyalists, 1/3 in the middle, and 1/3 true blue, which is to say American patriots, and it was about winning that middle third. And what I find really striking with these monarchists, these Pahlavists, is they don't want to win that middle third. They just think the more demented and crazed and zealous I am, the more extreme my position, the more likely I am to win. This does seem to be an outgrowth, a feature of politics mediated through the digital environment, through social media and whatnot. Double down on zealotry, double down on extremism, and that's how you win, actually. Historically, that's anything but the case. We'll talk about this stuff a lot more over the coming weeks and months because it really is fascinating. And it's really exposed to me, actually, just how much these people hate themselves. They hate themselves, right? The idea that a country of 93 million people is going to return to Zoroastrianism. My dad, for instance, Iranian guy, he quite likes Zoroastrianism. He says, interesting religion, whatever. But Iran has been an Islamic country for 1,300 years, not 50 years. People say, it's only been a Muslim country since 1979. You have no idea what you're talking about. And of course, so much of this, as you said, Kieran, plays out through class. So much of it. I think the learning, though, for not just political elites, but publics as well in the West, is to not look at the debates regarding Iran or Cuba or Venezuela or Congo or anywhere else that matter, refracted through the prism of diasporas. Doesn't mean they're always wrong, but it's not necessarily a logical, smart, sensible way to understand what's going on in these countries. On May the 7th, people will be casting their ballots across much of England, voting for councils, with elections also taking place in Wales for the Senedd and in Scotland for the Scottish Parliament. Every single one of London's 32 boroughs will be up for grabs, with all-out elections in Birmingham, elsewhere in the West Midlands and across the North East, including Newcastle. 1/3 of councillors are also up for re-election in some very large authorities indeed, such as Leeds, Manchester and Sheffield. In all, 5,014 council seats across 136 local authorities will be contested. Polling last week from the FT suggests a political earthquake. You can see here there are some pretty big changes. According to Britain's leading financial paper, Labour stands to lose almost 2,000 councillors. That's about 40% of all their councillors. And the Tories over 1,000. Now, given these same seats were last contested in 2022, when the Tories lost 485 councillors, one might argue this result is actually worse for Kemi Badenoch than for Keir Starmer. The big beneficiaries, as you can see, appear to be Reform. They gain more than 2,200 councillors, and the Greens and the Lib Dems gaining 450 and 200 councillors respectively. That projection seems broadly in line with recent polling published today by YouGov. They have no change for Reform, who remain in the lead, with the Greens and Tories up 1% and 2% respectively, and Labour and the Lib Dems both down. That's huge. That's huge. The Greens now have more than 220,000 members. They've repeatedly polled second with YouGov and are set to win hundreds of new councillors, according to the FT. And that's all happening while their leader, Zach Polanski, gets into a war of words, a flame war, with the Daily Mail. This is not meant to happen. Earlier today, Nigel Farage was asked about the Greens hoovering up votes when it comes to the young.
Zach Polanski's polling with 16 to 24-year-olds has shot up to 51%, while Reform's has petered off to around 8%. Critics often point to the older age crowds attending your local election rallies. Do you worry Reform is becoming the party of the middle-aged and old? And are you concerned that not having the youth on your side could significantly harm your party's prospects come the time of the next general election? Thank you very much.
I don't recognise those figures at all. In fact, the last few times I've looked at numbers, the number of 16 to 18-year-olds that would vote Reform was in the middle high 20s, almost reflective of our percentage across the whole of the country. And do you know something? I was in Hull last night, right? And we advertised in Hull, we were doing a public event. 950 people came, of whom 80% were not members of Reform, and most of whom, when spoken to, had never been to a political event in their lives. And I wonder, you know, whether Keir Starmer would get a turnout like that in Hull, or whether Kemi Badenoch would, or whether Ed Davey would, or so. I don't quite recognise those numbers. However, you know, what Polanski is doing is tapping into, you know, a sort of university student, half indoctrinated youth who find Marxism very appealing. And this is not uncommon. This happens once every generation or so. Real hard left politics becomes popular. And in doing so, of course, you know, he's seriously damaging the Labour Party. Now, quite how this coalition works, quite how people who support trans issues can align with people who are extreme social conservatives, as is the case in many of the Denton and Gorton and Denton voters, I just don't know. How that coalition holds, I just don't understand it.
I was just watching Robert Jenrick through all of that, and you can just see his face going, okay, where's this going? He's talking about, you know, radical left Marxist university students. And Farage says, this happens once every generation. It happened 10 minutes ago with Jeremy Corbyn. I don't think he really believes what he's saying. I think he recognises that the Greens are reflecting, or the success of the Greens under Polanski is reflecting the same thing which is powering the rise of Reform, which is the collapse of the two-party system. I think he's not daft enough to think otherwise. But that was quite interesting. Kieran, we're going to go to another clip of him in a moment, but what did you think of that response from Farage?
First of all, it reminded me a bit of, for anybody who's seen The Office UK, Finchy was Farage and Jenrick was Brent, and nodding to everything he said, but not really in the room. I mean, it's incontestable. What you said is incontestable, Aaron, that the two-party system has crumbled despite the system not changing. And I think that speaks to the wider conditions in society. I think it speaks to Well, just simply a time frame thing, trying the same thing over and over again, feeling like we're in Groundhog Day, and that basically reaching its limit, its event horizon, and charismatic leaders, which is what Zach Polanski and, for ill, Nigel Farage are, coming along at a particular moment in time when house prices are unattainable for a lot of people. There's an entire generation that feels completely locked out. There are social dislocations which disturb older people, whatever it is. There are a lot of things that have shifted over the past 5 to 10 years in the economy, in technology, in the way that people consume their media. That's an important part of it as well. Breaking of the kind of legacy media monopoly. And all of those things have landed in a collapse of a two-party system. And it will just be very interesting to see how the polling translates to actual voting in the May elections.
Yeah, I mean, Farage, they're saying as well, it's university students and ultra-leftists. I mean, if you look at the YouGov data, I think the Greens are actually maybe even winning amongst under 65s. Amongst the working age population, the Greens are first. Pretty sure. Certainly far and away the largest party amongst under 50s. Which again, he's not going to say that. Why should he say that? He's obviously meant to diminish the competition and big up his own party. But many people on the right, both in media and politics, do think that, and they're really, really at odds with reality. Let's go back to that video, because here is where Farage makes actually a pretty important point.
The Labour Party's in bigger trouble than anyone's realised. Because you're going to see inner city populations, areas with big Muslim populations, areas with big student populations. One can think of 4/5 London boroughs this year in which Labour are going to be wiped out. But then go further north. Go into the West Midlands. Go up to the northwest. Go to the northeast. Go to South Wales. And you'll find very large numbers of people who've been Labour families for generations are going to vote Reform.
I mean, this is the point, isn't it, Kieran? And it aligns with what you see with that stuff from the FT, saying that Reform are going to pick up more than 2,000 councillors, the Greens more than 450, maybe more than 400. You might look at that and then look at the national polling. So, well, hold on, why aren't the Greens winning more? Why are Reform benefiting so much from the collapse of the Labour vote? But that's because actually, the Greens are, yes, picking up lots of votes in places like London, other major cities, but in terms of the geographical spread, from the northeast to South Wales, bits of the West Midlands as well, it's Reform that are gaining from Labour. The common theme, though, is that Labour are in big, big trouble.
Right.
I suppose the question for people like Zach Polanski, and I really do want to get him on this show before those local elections, is you're benefiting from the collapse of the two-party system, but ultimately, does that just mean a Reform government? Or if not Reform government, Reform being the largest party, which is, by the way, where I think we're heading right now.
I suspect that's where we're heading, yeah. And actually, it's important we highlight Labour's failures here, because it's not just that the wider conditions in society and the economy have changed. It's also that Labour abjectly failed. They failed to do politics properly, right? They failed to build a coalition. They failed to build an effective electoral coalition, whether that's the urban professionals, whether that's people in Wales, as Farage points out, South Wales and up north. And there was no attempt to build a cohesive electoral coalition. There was no attempt to sell policies that would appeal to different cohorts, different constituencies in the country. And as a result, you see this as much as anything else, the collapse of the Labour Party precipitating the decline of the two-party system here. I think that Reform went through a couple of turbulent months, didn't it? I mean, it had a couple of turbulent months. This polling seems to be pretty robust, though. If you
look at the polling averages, it definitely has turned down.
Yeah, right? It's turned down. Yeah, exactly. And so that's why I say it will be interesting to see how the polling translates to actual votes in May. Polls, of course, are wrong frequently, but I would be surprised if they're that wrong on this occasion. It seems that Reform has managed to weather its storms fairly well, but what I do see emerging is this new kind of trend with Reform, where they've gone from being the new kids on the block, where they're able to be really positive and kind of articulate a alternative vision of Britain not one that you or I would, or our audience would go along with, but an alternative vision of Britain. They kind of went some distance from that toward the kind of Matt Goodwin miserabilism. You know, everything's terrible, this is really bad. That was always at the root of their philosophy anyway. But they did a good job of kind of sanitizing that and packaging it as something akin to Nigel Farage's personality, which, again, obviously I don't like the guy, but he's very good at being an optimistic figurehead. You know, he's got that almost Reaganite quality about him. It makes people feel good about themselves. He makes them feel optimistic. There was a real divergence between that and where, you know, the kind of messaging that Reform was putting out for a while. So I don't see them necessarily reversing that. They still seem to be defined by what they're against. And what they're against seems to be a lot of things, a lot of realities in modern Britain. So it'll be interesting to see how that versus a genuinely optimistic vision articulation from the Green Party, see how that plays out.
Yeah, people calling Matt Goodwin Matt Badloss. I like Matt Bad Whinge. All he was doing was whinging, and the crash out was pretty crazy. And I do think that Reform thought they would benefit from being none of the above, right? We are against the uni party, whether you don't like the Tories, whether you don't like Labour, they both failed Britain, come vote for us. I think the rise of the Greens has changed that a bit. And I do think the Greens are taking some votes off them for precisely that. I don't think that stops them being the largest party, but it could be the difference between being, you know, the largest party and having a majority. I actually now think that is very much up for grabs. We're going to end the show there. It's been a good one. Some very, very important stories. Kieran, thanks for joining me tonight.
Well, thank you for having me, Aaron. Thanks so much.
And thank you all for joining us here at Novara Towers. Thank you for tuning in. Come back tomorrow for another live stream from 6 p.m. For now, you have been watching Novara Media. Good night.